The first time Rhett mentioned the wedding, he sounded miserable. Not nervous, not emotional. Miserable. We were sitting on the hood of my truck outside the old baseball field near our hometown, passing a gas station coffee back and forth while the summer air stuck to our skin. It was almost midnight, and Rhett had been unusually quiet for most of the evening. That alone should have told me something was wrong. Rhett was never quiet. He was the kind of person who filled space without trying. Loud laugh, easy smile, constant motion. Even when we were kids, people naturally turned toward him in every room. Teachers loved him. Girls loved him. Coaches forgave him for things the rest of us would have gotten benched over. Me? I was just Christian, the best friend. And honestly, I'd spent most of my life being okay with that. You know what the worst part is? Rhett muttered finally, staring out at the empty field. I glanced sideways at him. The seating chart? He laughed once under his breath. I'm serious. So am I. Weddings sound terrible. He nudged my shoulder with his. You're an asshole. True. Silence settled again. Then he said, quieter this time. Everyone keeps telling me I should be excited. That caught my attention. I turned toward him fully. You're not. He shrugged, but it looked forced. I mean, I love Hannah. There was something strange about the way he said it. Like he was reciting something he'd practiced. You don't sound convincing, I admitted carefully. Rhett rubbed both hands over his face, exhausted. That's the problem. I didn't know what to say to that. For context, Rhett and Hannah had been together for almost 4 years. They were the couple everyone expected to last. She was smart, kind, ridiculously patient with him. Their families already acted married. Half the town probably thought they already were. The engagement had happened 6 months earlier during a beach trip with both families. Very public. Very Rhett. Photos all over social media. Hannah crying. Rhett smiling like he'd just won something. At the time, I remembered staring at the announcement on my phone for a long time before finally liking it. Then I went to the gym and stayed there until closing because I didn't know what else to do with myself. You want to know something awful? Rhett asked suddenly. Always. He looked down at the coffee cup in his hands. Sometimes I think I only proposed because it was the next thing I was supposed to do. The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten. That doesn't mean you don't love her, I said carefully. I know. He sighed. I do love her. Again, that hesitation. Again, that strange emptiness underneath the words. I should have let it go. Probably would have, if this were anyone else. But Rhett and I had known each other since we were 11 years old. I could tell when something inside him was off before he even opened his mouth. You want to back out? I asked quietly. His head snapped toward me instantly. No. Too fast. Then his expression softened. I mean, I can't. That landed harder than it should have. You can, I said. Technically. He laughed bitterly. Yeah? Tell that to our families. Tell that to Hannah after 4 years together. Tell that to literally everyone who already thinks our lives are planned out. I didn't answer. Because he wasn't wrong. Small towns are dangerous like that. People build your future for you before you even decide if you want it. Rhett leaned back on his elbows, staring at the sky. You ever feel like your life happened before you had the chance to choose it? He asked. I swallowed. Because yeah, constantly. But not for the reasons he meant. See, there was something Rhett didn't know about me. Something nobody knew. I'd been in love with him for almost 8 years. Not in the dramatic movie kind of way. It was quieter than that. Worse, honestly. Slow. Persistent. The kind of feeling that sneaks into every part of your life until you don't remember what existing without it felt like. And before anyone says it no, I never planned to tell him. What would have been the point? Rhett was straight. Engaged. In love with his fiancée, even if he sounded confused lately. Meanwhile, I perfected the art of being close enough to him to matter without wanting more than I could have. At least, that's what I told myself. You're doing that thing again, Rhett said. I blinked. What thing? Thinking too hard. Someone has to around here. He smiled faintly at that, but it faded fast. Then he asked, You ever think I'm making a mistake? Every muscle in my body locked up. I forced out a laugh. You really asking your emotionally unavailable best friend for relationship advice? I'm serious, Chris. He only called me Chris when something mattered. I looked at him sitting there under the dim field lights, shoulders tense, engagement ring catching faint silver every time he moved his hand. And suddenly, I had the terrifying feeling that this conversation was about something bigger than weddings. I think, I said slowly, that if you're this unhappy before the wedding, you should probably figure out why. Rhett stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, like I'd confirmed something he was already afraid of. Neither of us spoke after that. The night air buzzed with crickets. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across town. Eventually, Rhett stood up and stretched. "I should get home," he said. "Yeah." But he didn't move right away. Instead, he looked at me with this strange expression I couldn't quite read. Something tense and uncertain and almost guilty. "You know you're my person, right?" he said quietly. My heart stumbled so hard it actually hurt. I managed a small smile. That's a dangerously intense thing to say to another man in a parking lot. Usually he would have laughed. This time he didn't. He just kept looking at me. Then finally he said, "Good night, Christian." And for some reason, the way he said my name left me awake until 4 in the morning. Over the next 2 weeks, Rhett started showing up at my apartment constantly. At first, it felt normal. We'd always spent a lot of time together. Movie nights, late drives, beers on my porch after work. That wasn't new. But this was different in a way I couldn't fully explain. It was the frequency, the intensity, like he was avoiding being alone. Tuesday night, he showed up with takeout and no warning. Thursday, he came over after dinner at Hannah's place because, according to him, I needed air. Saturday, he texted me at midnight asking if I wanted to drive out to the lake. I said yes every time. Of course I did. That was the problem with Rhett. No matter how hard I tried to create boundaries in my own head, one look from him and they disappeared instantly. The lake that night was empty except for us. We sat on the dock with our shoes off, feet dangling over the water while moonlight reflected across the surface in soft silver streaks. Rhett had brought beer but barely touched his. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. I frowned. "Leaving what?" "This town." I shrugged. "Sometimes." "Why haven't you?" I almost laughed at the irony of that question. "Because of you." Instead I said, "Guess I got comfortable." Rhett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Comfort's dangerous. You sound like a guy halfway through a breakdown." "Maybe I am." That pulled my attention toward him immediately. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I asked carefully. He rubbed his jaw, visibly exhausted. "I don't know how." "Try." Silence. Then, "Do you ever wake up and feel like you're watching your own life happen from outside of it?" I swallowed. "Rhett, I'm serious." His voice cracked slightly. "I feel like I'm performing myself lately. Like everybody already decided who I am. And now I'm stuck playing the role forever." The rawness in his voice caught me off guard. Because Rhett never talked like this. Not with anyone. He was the easygoing one. The confident one. The guy who always knew exactly what he wanted. Except apparently he didn't. "You talked to Hannah about any of this?" I asked. Immediately his face closed off a little. "No." "Why not?" "Because she'll think it's about her." "Isn't it?" "That's the thing," he said quietly. "I don't think it is." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. The lake water moved softly beneath the dock. Rhett stared straight ahead when he spoke again. "Do you know what scares me most?" "What?" "That I should be happy." There it was again. That awful emptiness underneath everything he said about the wedding. "She's good to me," he continued. "My family loves her. Her family loves me. We barely fight. We've built this whole life together, and everybody keeps telling me how lucky I am. But," he laughed bitterly, "but every time someone brings up the wedding, I feel trapped." I didn't know what to say to that. Because no matter how much I loved him, I genuinely liked Hannah too. She didn't deserve this confusion hanging over her life. "You can still stop this," I said quietly. Rhett shook his head immediately. "No, you can." "No, Christian." He looked at me finally, eyes sharp now. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." He opened his mouth, closed it again. For one terrifying second, I thought he might actually say something real. Something irreversible. Instead, he stood up abruptly. "Forget it," he muttered. I watched him pace toward the end of the dock, restless energy pouring off him in waves. "Rhett." He dragged both hands through his hair. "I just wish my brain would shut up for like 5 minutes." I stood slowly. "Hey." He turned toward me. And suddenly we were too close. I hadn't even realized I'd walked toward him until we were standing barely a foot apart at the edge of the dock. The air shifted. I felt it instantly. So did he. Rhett's breathing slowed slightly. His eyes flicked toward my mouth for the briefest second before returning to my eyes. My pulse started hammering so hard I thought he might actually hear it. Neither of us moved. The tension between us felt enormous. Dangerous. Like one wrong decision could destroy both our lives instantly. Then Rhett stepped back. Fast. Sorry, he muttered, turning away from me immediately. My chest tightened painfully. For what? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head without looking at me. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. We both knew it. The drive home was quiet after that. Rhett kept the windows down the entire ride, one arm hanging outside while old rock music played low through the speakers. Usually silence between us felt easy. This felt loaded. When we pulled up outside my apartment, neither of us moved to get out right away. Finally, Rhett killed the engine. You ever think people can lie to themselves for so long they stop knowing what's true? He asked quietly. I looked at him carefully. Yeah. His jaw tightened. I think I've been doing that. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to ask what he meant. But fear stopped me, because some part of me already knew. And once certain truths get spoken out loud, there's no putting them back. Rhett looked exhausted suddenly. Smaller somehow. I'm tired, Chris. The softness in his voice nearly broke me. I reached over instinctively and squeezed the back of his neck the way I always did when he was stressed. Usually it meant nothing. This time it meant everything. Rhett froze beneath my hand. The air inside the truck turned impossibly still. Then slowly, so slowly, I almost thought I imagined it, he leaned into my touch. Just slightly, but enough. My heart stopped. Rhett closed his eyes for one brief second before pulling away completely. We should go inside, he said hoarsely. And for the first time in 8 years, I started wondering if the feeling between us had never been one-sided after all. After the lake, everything between us changed. Not outwardly. If someone looked at us from the outside, they probably wouldn't have noticed anything different. We still joked the same way. Still grabbed beers after work. Still spent half our free time together like we always had. But underneath it, everything felt different now. Because once you notice someone leaning into your touch, you never unnotice it. 3 days later, Rhett came over again. I opened the door to find him standing there in sweatpants and a faded college hoodie, looking exhausted. You look terrible, I said immediately. Thanks, man. You sleeping at all? Not really. He brushed past me into the apartment like he lived there, which honestly wasn't far from the truth anymore. I closed the door carefully behind him. Bad fight. Rhett dropped onto my couch and leaned his head back. No. That surprised me. With Hannah? We don't really fight, he said quietly. Something about that answer made me uneasy. Isn't that supposed to be a good thing? Probably. But he didn't sound convinced. I tossed him a water bottle from the fridge before sitting in the chair across from him. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Rhett asked, You ever love someone and still feel wrong? The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Every instinct told me to be careful here. Very careful. What kind of wrong? I asked slowly. He stared at the ceiling for several seconds before answering. Like, you're trying to force yourself into a life that should fit, but doesn't. My stomach twisted painfully. Rhett, I know how it sounds. Do you? His eyes finally found mine. And there it was again, that unbearable tension that had been building between us for weeks now. You know what my mom said yesterday? He asked quietly. What? She told me Hannah looks at me like I hung the moon. I swallowed hard. And I think she deserves someone who looks back at her the same way. The honesty in his voice scared me. Because this wasn't wedding jitters anymore. This was something deeper. Something unraveling. You need to talk to her, I said carefully. Immediately Rhett looked away. I can't. Yes, you can. No, Christian, I really can't. Why? He stood abruptly and started pacing my apartment again, restless energy radiating off him. Because what if I ruin her life over something temporary? He snapped. What if I'm just losing my mind before the wedding? What if I blow everything up and regret it 6 months later? I stood to now. You don't sound temporary. That stopped him cold. The silence stretched between us. Then Rhett laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You know what's funny? What? You're the only person I can actually breathe around lately. My chest tightened painfully. Rhett, I mean it. He looked at me fully now, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. Everywhere else feels loud. Everybody wants something from me. Everybody expects me to act excited and grateful and ready. His voice dropped quieter. But when I'm here with you, everything goes quiet. God, I couldn't breathe properly suddenly. Because he had no idea what saying things like that did to me. Or maybe he did. That possibility terrified me most of all. You should go home, I said carefully. Rhett frowned immediately. Why? Because this is getting messy. His expression shifted slightly at that. Messy how? I laughed once under my breath. Mostly because panic was climbing into my throat fast. Seriously? He stared at me. Then, very softly, he asked, "Are you going to make me say it first?" Every sound in the room disappeared. I felt frozen. Rhett looked terrified after the words left his mouth, like he wanted to take them back immediately, but couldn't. "Rhett, I don't know what's happening to me," he admitted quietly. "I swear to God, I don't." He looked genuinely shaken by it. And somehow that made it worse. Because if this had been casual curiosity or confusion, maybe I could have survived it. But this looked real. "I've spent my whole life knowing exactly who I was supposed to be," he continued, voice uneven now. "And then suddenly I'm around you, and my brain just—" He stopped himself hard. My heart was beating violently now. "Don't," I whispered. His eyes locked onto mine instantly. "Don't what?" "Don't say something you can't take back." Rhett stared at me for a long moment. Then he crossed the room before I could process what was happening. 1 second there was space between us. The next, he was standing directly in front of me, close enough that I could see how nervous he actually was. Close enough that I noticed his hands shaking slightly. "Christian," he said quietly, "have you seriously never noticed?" I think my entire body stopped functioning for a second. Because no, I hadn't noticed. I'd spent 8 years convincing myself I imagined every look too long, every moment too intense, every strange tension between us. And now he was standing in my apartment looking at me like this. "You're engaged," I said weakly. The pain that crossed his face nearly destroyed me. "I know. You love Hannah. I do love her. But—" His eyes closed briefly. "But I think I'm in love with you." The room went completely silent. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the fact that the sentence I'd secretly wanted for years was finally happening and felt catastrophic instead of romantic. Rhett looked terrified after saying it, like the truth had physically left damage behind. Neither of us moved. Then quietly, almost unbearably softly, he admitted, "I think I have been for a long time. I wish I could say I handled it well, that I immediately knew what to do. That years of loving Rhett somehow prepared me for the moment he finally admitted he loved me back. It didn't. I just stood there staring at him like my brain had stopped processing language entirely." Rhett looked wrecked. Not relieved. Not happy. Wrecked. Like the confession itself had torn something open inside him. "I shouldn't have said that," he muttered suddenly, stepping backward. "Forget it. Seriously, just forget I said anything." My body finally restarted. "Rhett. No." He dragged both hands through his hair violently. "No, I can't do this to you too." Two. That word hit me immediately. Two. Meaning Hannah. Meaning himself. Meaning everyone. "You don't get to drop that on me and then run away from it," I said quietly. His eyes snapped back to mine instantly. "You think I want this?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. "You think this feels good?" "No," I admitted. And honestly, that was the heartbreaking part. Because Rhett wasn't confessing like someone finally embracing a hidden truth. He looked terrified of himself. I tried to ignore it, he continued hoarsely. For months, maybe longer, I kept telling myself it was stress or cold feet or just attachment because you're my best friend. Every word felt like it physically lodged itself somewhere inside my chest. "But it kept getting worse," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "Since when?" Rhett laughed softly, exhausted. "I don't even know anymore." Then his expression shifted into something more vulnerable than I'd ever seen from him before. "Do you know why I kept coming over here?" I stayed silent. "Because every time I was away from you, I missed you so badly it actually pissed me off." "God." He looked down at the floor when he continued. "And every time Hannah talked about the wedding lately, all I could think about was how wrong it felt that you weren't the person standing next to me." My knees nearly gave out. 8 years. 8 years of burying this feeling alive. And now suddenly Rhett was standing in my apartment saying things I'd only ever let myself imagine at 3 in the morning. This should have felt perfect. Instead it felt devastating. Because there was still a woman planning a wedding to him. There were still families involved. Still an entire future already built around a version of Rhett that apparently didn't fully exist anymore. "You need to tell Hannah," I said quietly. Immediately pain flashed across his face again. "I know. When? I don't know." "Rhett." I said I don't know. His voice cracked harder that time. The room fell silent again. Then softly, he asked, "Are you angry?" The question nearly broke me. "No," I admitted honestly. "You should be." "Why?" "Because I'm ruining your life too now." I stared at him for a long moment before finally laughing under my breath. You really think this is the part ruining my life? His brow furrowed slightly. And before I could stop myself, I said it. I've been in love with you since I was 17. Rhett froze completely. The silence afterward felt enormous. You what? Too late now. I looked away first because suddenly I couldn't stand seeing his face. Yeah, I muttered. Surprise. Rhett just stared at me. For several long seconds, he genuinely looked unable to speak. Then finally, Christian, you don't have to say anything. How the hell did I not know that? I laughed weakly. Because I never wanted you to. He looked genuinely shaken now, for an entirely different reason. All this time, I nodded once. Rhett sat down heavily on the edge of my couch, like his legs stopped working. That's why you never dated anybody seriously, he realized quietly. I shrugged, uncomfortable suddenly. Probably. Oh my God, please don't make this dramatic. How am I supposed to not make this dramatic? He looked up at me with disbelief all over his face. You've just been carrying this around silently for years. I managed. Christian, what was I supposed to do? I snapped suddenly, emotion finally breaking through. Tell my straight best friend I was in love with him while he planned a future with somebody else. Rhett flinched hard. Immediately guilt crashed through me. Sorry, I muttered. No, you're right. The softness in his voice hurt worse somehow. He sat there staring at the floor for a long time before finally speaking again. I think some part of me knew. That got my attention instantly. Rhett looked miserable. I just didn't let myself look at it too closely. My pulse started hammering again. Why? He laughed bitterly. Because if I admitted what was happening between us, then I had to admit what it said about me. There it was. The real fear underneath everything. Not just the wedding. Not just Hannah. Himself. I've spent my entire life being one version of a person, he said quietly. And now suddenly none of it feels stable anymore. I walked over slowly and sat beside him on the couch. Not touching, just close. Rhett looked over at me then, eyes exhausted and vulnerable and painfully honest. I don't know who I am right now, he admitted. And maybe because I'd loved him for so long already, the answer came naturally. You're still Rhett. His face tightened slightly at that. You say that like it's simple. It is. No, it isn't. He looked away again. Because if I blow up my life over this, and it turns out I'm confused, you're not confused. The certainty in my voice surprised both of us. Rhett stared at me. How do you know? Because nobody looks at their best friend the way you look at me. Because nobody falls apart like this over confusion. Because I've loved you long enough to recognize it when it's looking back at me. Instead, I just said quietly. Because people don't torture themselves this much over something that isn't real. Rhett's breathing went uneven. And then, before either of us could think better of it, he reached for me. Not rushed. Not desperate. Just honest. His hand slid against mine slowly, carefully, like he was terrified I might pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. The second our fingers intertwined, Rhett closed his eyes like the contact physically relieved something inside him. And that terrified both of us more than anything else had yet. For 3 days after that, Rhett avoided me. Not completely. He still answered texts. Still sent stupid memes at 2 in the morning. Still reacted to my Instagram story like nothing catastrophic had happened between us. But he stopped coming over. Stopped calling. Stopped looking at me for too long. And honestly, it wrecked me. Because now that I finally knew the truth, every hour of silence felt unbearable. By Friday night, I was pacing my apartment trying not to text him something reckless when someone knocked on my door. I already knew it was him. Rhett stood there looking exhausted again, baseball cap low over his eyes like he could somehow hide inside it. You disappeared, I said immediately. Yeah, that's all you have. He exhaled heavily and walked inside before answering. I was trying to think. How's that going for you? Terrible. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Rhett turned toward me slowly once the door shut behind him. I ended things with Hannah. Every thought in my brain stopped instantly. What? His throat moved hard before he repeated quietly, I told her tonight. I stared at him in complete shock. Part of me had expected him to delay this for weeks. Months maybe, but not days. Not this fast. How did she take it? Pain crossed his face immediately. Bad. Guilt hit me like a wave, even though logically I knew this wasn't my fault. Rhett noticed instantly. Don't do that. Do what? Blame yourself. I'm not. Yes, you are. He stepped closer, eyes locked on mine now. This isn't because of you, Christian. This was already broken before either of us admitted anything. I wanted to believe that. Still, Hannah's face kept flashing through my head. Did you tell her about me? I asked carefully. Rhett looked away immediately. Not exactly. My stomach tightened. Rhett. She asked if there was someone else. And he rubbed both hands over his face. And I told her there were feelings involved that I didn't understand until recently. That answer told me everything. I sat down heavily on the couch. Rhett stayed standing for a second before finally sitting beside me, shoulders slumped like he'd aged 5 years overnight. She cried, he admitted quietly. There was genuine heartbreak in his voice. Not romantic confusion. Not regret over leaving. Just pain from hurting somebody he cared about deeply. I never wanted to destroy her, he whispered. You didn't. It feels like I did. Silence stretched between us. Then quietly, I asked, how did she know? Rhett frowned slightly. Know what? That something was wrong. His expression shifted immediately, and suddenly he looked almost ashamed. She asked me if I was in love with you. My heart nearly stopped. What? Rhett laughed once under his breath, exhausted. Apparently, everybody figured us out before we did. I stared at him. What did you say? At first, nothing. He shook his head slowly. Then she asked me why I looked more alive talking about you than I had talking about our wedding in months. Jesus Christ. Rhett leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. I think she knew before I did. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The weight of everything sat heavy in the room now. A broken engagement. A devastated woman. Two best friends sitting side by side, trying to process feelings they'd buried for years. Finally, Rhett spoke again. You want to know the worst part? I looked over at him carefully. The second I admitted it out loud, his voice softened. I felt relieved. There was so much guilt in the confession that it physically hurt to hear. I hated that, he whispered. She's crying in front of me, and part of me feels relieved. I understood that feeling better than he realized. The terror of truth mixed with the relief of finally stopping the lie. Rhett turned his head toward me slowly. I almost came here afterward. You did come here. No, his eyes held mine now. I mean immediately. Straight from her house. Something about the way he said it shifted the air again. Because suddenly it hit me fully. Rhett chose me first. Not after weeks of uncertainty. Not after slowly drifting away. Immediately. The realization scared me more than anything yet. You should probably hate me a little, I admitted quietly. Rhett frowned. For what? For being happy you're here. His expression softened instantly. Then, before I could process what he was doing, he reached over and took my hand again. This time there was no hesitation. No fear. Just warmth. Christian, he said softly. You've spent 8 years loving me without asking for anything. My chest tightened painfully. You don't get to feel guilty for finally being loved back. God. I looked away because suddenly my eyes burned. Rhett noticed immediately. Hey, I'm fine. You're absolutely not fine. I laughed weakly. Yeah, probably not. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Rhett said the sentence that changed everything. I almost kissed you at the lake. Every nerve in my body lit up instantly. What? That night. His thumb moved slightly against my hand without thinking. When you touched my neck in the truck afterward, I remembered every second of it. The silence. The way he leaned into me. The feeling that something irreversible had almost happened. I wanted to kiss you so badly it scared me, he admitted quietly. The honesty in his voice made it impossible to breathe normally. Why didn't you? Rhett looked at me for a very long moment before answering. Because if I kissed you, he said softly, I knew my old life was over. Silence. Heavy and enormous and honest. Then slowly, carefully, he added, and I think some part of me knew I was going to do it eventually anyway. The first kiss happened 20 minutes later, and honestly, it still didn't feel real. Rhett and I were still sitting on the couch, hands tangled together, the room completely quiet except for the sound of his uneven breathing. Neither of us had moved away. Neither of us seemed capable of pretending anymore either. You keep looking at me like you're waiting for permission, I said quietly. Rhett swallowed hard. Maybe I am. My heart nearly stopped. For a second, I just stared at him, trying to process the fact that this was actually happening. That the person I'd loved for years was sitting inches away from me looking nervous about touching me. Rhett. Nervous. It almost broke my brain. You know what's crazy? He murmured suddenly. What? I've imagined this so many times lately. The confession hit me hard. How lately? He laughed weakly. Do you really want the answer to that? Probably not. Definitely yes. Before I could respond, Rhett's eyes dropped briefly toward my mouth again. And this time neither of us looked away from it. The air shifted instantly. Every nerve in my body felt awake. "Christian," he said softly, "tell me to stop and I will." That nearly destroyed me because he sounded completely sincere, like my comfort mattered more to him than what he wanted. I shook my head slowly. Rhett exhaled sharply through his nose like he'd been holding his breath for hours. Then carefully, almost painfully carefully, he leaned toward me. The first touch was soft, tentative, nothing like I'd imagined over the years. Not dramatic, not rushed, just Rhett finally letting himself do something he'd clearly been fighting for a long time. The second it happened, he froze slightly against me, not pulling away, just overwhelmed. I understood the feeling completely, because suddenly every version of my life before this moment felt far away. Rhett kissed me once more, still slow, still careful, before finally leaning his forehead against mine. "Oh my God," he whispered. I laughed softly despite myself. "You okay?" "No," he actually smiled a little then, breath shaky. "I think I'm having a full identity crisis." That pulled a real laugh out of me. Rhett looked relieved hearing it. Then his expression softened again into something quieter. "I can't believe it's you," he admitted. "What does that mean?" He looked embarrassed suddenly. "I don't know. If somebody told me a year ago that this would happen, I would have thought they were insane." "Same." "No, seriously." He shook his head slowly. "You've been my best friend for half my life. And now." Rhett's eyes met mine again. And there it was. That terrifying honesty again. "Now I think you've been the most important person in my life for way longer than I understood." My chest physically ached hearing that. Because deep down, I think I'd always known it too. Rhett leaned back finally, running both hands through his hair again. "I should probably feel worse right now," he admitted quietly. The guilt underneath the sentence was immediate. "Hannah." He nodded. I stayed silent. "She asked me if I was in love with you," he murmured again, almost to himself this time. "And I remember sitting there trying to deny it while thinking about kissing you." The raw honesty of that made my stomach twist. "She deserves better than that," he whispered. "She deserves honesty," I said carefully. Rhett looked over at me. "And you gave it to her." He nodded slowly, but the guilt still lingered all over him. After a moment, he asked quietly, "Do you think I'm a terrible person?" The question caught me off guard. "No." You answered too fast. "Because it's true." Rhett looked unconvinced. "I hurt someone who loved me because I was too scared to understand myself sooner." "That doesn't make you terrible." "It doesn't make me good either." "Maybe not. But I understood him too well to judge him for it." Rhett had spent his entire life following expectations without questioning them. Football star, good son, long-term girlfriend, future husband. Meanwhile, the truth had apparently been sitting quietly between us for years, waiting for him to notice it. And now that he had, everything else collapsed under the weight of it. "You want to know something awful?" Rhett asked suddenly. "What?" "The second I kissed you." He looked down at our still intertwined hands. Everything made sense. God. I looked away because I genuinely didn't know how to survive hearing things like that from him. Rhett noticed immediately. "Hey." "What?" "You can look at me, you know." I laughed weakly. "That's kind of the problem." His smile softened. Then, very quietly, he admitted, "I think I've been trying not to look at you for years." The room went completely still. "Rhett, I mean it." His voice dropped lower now, more vulnerable. "You know how people joke about emotional cheating?" I nodded carefully. "I think I've been doing that with you without realizing it." My pulse hammered violently again. "Every important thing in my life," he swallowed hard. "You were the first person I wanted to tell. Every time something happened, I looked for you first. Every room I walked into, I checked where you were before I relaxed. I couldn't breathe properly anymore. And when Hannah asked me who I couldn't live without," he whispered, "your name came into my head before I could stop it." Silence. Heavy and terrifying and heartbreakingly honest. Then Rhett laughed softly at himself, eyes shining slightly now. "I really ruined my own life, huh?" Without thinking, I squeezed his hand tighter. Rhett looked down at it immediately, then back at me. And the way he looked at me then, not confused anymore, not scared, just certain, which honestly terrified me even more. The next week felt unreal, not in a dreamy way, in a dangerous way. Like both of us knew one wrong move could collapse everything we were trying to build before it even fully existed. Rhett practically lived at my apartment now. Not officially, but he'd show up after work, throw his keys on my counter, steal food out of my fridge like he owned the place, then fall asleep halfway through whatever movie we were pretending to watch. And every single time, I caught myself staring at him thinking, this is actually happening. The weirdest part? Rhett seemed calmer now than he had in months. Not perfectly okay. The guilt about Hannah still lingered around him constantly. Sometimes he'd go quiet out of nowhere, staring at nothing while his thoughts clearly spiraled somewhere dark. But underneath all of it, there was relief too. Like he'd finally stopped fighting himself long enough to breathe. One night we were lying on opposite ends of my couch when he suddenly said, "My mom thinks I'm having a nervous breakdown." I laughed softly. "Are you?" "Maybe." He smiled faintly. "But apparently I'm a happier version of one now." That pulled a real laugh out of me. Rhett turned his head toward me immediately at the sound, smiling in that soft, distracted way he only ever did around me. God, that smile alone could still ruin me. "You know what I realized?" he asked quietly. "What?" "I don't think I've relaxed around anyone else in years." Something about the honesty in his voice made my chest ache again. "You shouldn't say things like that casually," I muttered. "Why?" "Because I don't know how to survive hearing them." Rhett's expression softened instantly. Then he sat up slowly and moved closer until our knees touched. "You survived 8 years of being in love with me secretly," he pointed out. "I think you can survive compliments." "That's different." "How?" "Because now you say things back." His face changed at that. More serious now. More open. "I wish you understood what that does to me," he admitted quietly. My pulse jumped instantly. "What?" "Knowing you loved me all that time." I looked away automatically. Rhett noticed and immediately nudged my leg with his. "No, don't do that." "Do what?" "Act embarrassed about it." "I'm not embarrassed. You literally can't look at me right now." I laughed weakly. "Because it's overwhelming." Rhett went quiet for a second. Then softly, "You know what's overwhelming for me?" I looked back at him carefully. "The idea that every time I pulled away from you over the years," his voice tightened slightly. "You probably thought it was because I didn't feel this too." Jesus, Rhett. And meanwhile I was pulling away because I felt it too much. The room fell silent instantly. I stared at him. "You did." He laughed under his breath, almost miserable. "Christian, I used to avoid being alone with you for too long because it made me feel weird." That genuinely shocked me. "What?" I didn't understand it. He rubbed his jaw, frustrated at himself now. "I just knew sometimes you'd look at me and my brain would completely short-circuit." My heart started hammering again. And instead of asking myself why like a normal person, he continued, "I'd go flirt with girls or throw myself into football or act like an idiot until the feeling passed." "Oh my God. Yeah." He dropped his head back against the couch dramatically. "Turns out repression is a real thing." Despite everything, I laughed hard enough that Rhett grinned hearing it. Then slowly his smile faded into something quieter. "You know what finally broke me," he admitted. "What?" "That night at the lake. Every nerve in my body lit up again remembering it. The way you touched me in the truck after," he murmured. "I went home afterward and literally sat in my driveway for an hour, trying to understand why I wanted to turn around and kiss you." My chest physically hurt now. And once I admitted that to myself, he continued softly. Everything else started unraveling. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask all week. "Do you regret it?" Rhett looked at me immediately. "What?" "The wedding. Hannah. All of this." Pain flickered across his face briefly. "I regret hurting her," he said honestly. I nodded slowly. "But I don't regret the truth." The certainty in his voice hit me hard. Rhett reached for my hand again automatically now, like it was already instinct. "I spent so long trying to become the version of myself everybody expected," he admitted quietly. "And the scary part is I think I convinced myself I was happy because it was easier than questioning it." He looked at me then with that same unbearable honesty again. "But you always felt real." God. I closed my eyes briefly because I genuinely didn't know how one person was supposed to survive being loved back this hard. Rhett noticed immediately. "What?" "You keep saying things that sound fake." He frowned. "Fake how?" "Like things I imagined hearing from you so many times they stopped sounding possible." His entire expression softened instantly after that. Then, very quietly, he said, "Well, get used to it." I opened my eyes again. Rhett was already looking at me differently now. Not like someone confused. Not like someone panicking. Like someone finally allowing himself to want something openly. And honestly, that terrified me almost as much as it made me happy. Because for the first time since all this started, Rhett didn't look uncertain anymore. He looked committed. 3 weeks before the wedding date, Rhett officially canceled everything. Venue, catering, guests, all of it. I wasn't there when he told his parents, But judging by the way he looked when he showed up at my apartment afterward, it hadn't gone well. He stood in my doorway looking exhausted beyond words. "My dad thinks I'm ruining my future," he said flatly. I stepped aside immediately to let him in. My mom cried. I closed the door carefully behind him. "I'm sorry." Rhett shrugged, but it looked hollow. "Honestly, me too." He dropped onto my couch heavily, elbows on his knees. "They keep asking if this is some kind of phase." Anger flashed through me instantly. Rhett noticed. "Hey," he said quietly. "Don't. They don't get to talk about you like that. They're scared. That doesn't make it okay." He looked at me for a long moment after that. Then softly, "You get protective when you're mad." I crossed my arms. "Obviously." Rhett smiled faintly for the first time since walking in. God, even exhausted and emotionally destroyed, he still had that effect on me. "I told them about you," he admitted suddenly. Every thought in my brain stopped. "You what?" He looked nervous now for the first time all evening. My mom asked if there was someone else. He swallowed hard. And I said yes. My pulse started hammering instantly. "What exactly did you say?" Rhett looked at the floor briefly before answering. "I said I fell in love with my best friend." Jesus Christ. The room felt smaller suddenly. How'd they react? My dad got really quiet. He laughed weakly, which honestly scared me more than yelling. "And your mom?" Rhett's expression softened slightly. "She asked if you make me happy." That caught me off guard completely. "What?" She said she hasn't seen me smile normally in months. His eyes found mine again. "Then she asked if being with you felt honest." Emotion climbed hard into my chest unexpectedly. "What did you tell her?" Rhett didn't even hesitate. "Yes." Silence filled the room after that. Heavy, emotional, real. Then Rhett leaned back slowly and closed his eyes. "You know what's weird?" he murmured. "What?" I thought admitting this stuff out loud would make me feel ashamed. My chest tightened. But it doesn't. He opened his eyes again then, looking directly at me. "It just feels true." God. I sat beside him quietly. Rhett immediately leaned into me without thinking, shoulder pressing against mine naturally now. The ease of it still stunned me sometimes. "You okay?" I asked softly. He exhaled slowly. "I think so." "Think so? I mean," he laughed tiredly. "My life exploded. Half the town probably thinks I'm insane. Hannah's family hates me. My dad barely looked at me tonight." Pain twisted through my chest hearing it all said out loud like that. "But," he continued quietly, "for the first time in my life, I'm not lying to myself." And honestly, that mattered. A lot. The room fell quiet again for a while before Rhett suddenly asked, "Do you remember senior year?" I frowned slightly. "That narrows it down." "The bonfire after our last football game." My stomach tightened immediately because unfortunately, yes. I remembered it perfectly. Mostly because that had been the night I realized my feelings for him were serious enough to ruin me. "You got really drunk," I recalled carefully. Rhett laughed softly. "Yeah. Apparently emotional repression makes people overcompensate." I smiled despite myself. Then his expression shifted into something more thoughtful. "You know what I remember most?" "What?" "You almost kissed me." My entire body froze. "What?" Rhett looked amused by my panic now. "You seriously think I didn't notice?" "That was 8 years ago." "Exactly." His smile softened slightly. "And I still remember the look on your face when you realized what you were doing." I stared at him in complete shock. "You knew?" "Not fully." He shook his head slowly. "But I remember wanting you to do it." My heart stopped. "Rhett." "I didn't understand why at the time," he admitted quietly. "Honestly, I think it scared the hell out of both of us." That was true. I remembered stumbling backward afterwards so fast it practically looked like fear. Maybe because it was. Rhett looked down at our hands resting together between us. "I think we've been circling this for years," he murmured. The terrifying part? He was probably right. Every almost moment. Every strange silence. Every look held too long. Neither of us had been imagining it. We'd both just been too afraid to understand what it meant. Rhett squeezed my hand gently. "You know what the craziest part is?" he asked quietly. "What?" I thought choosing this would feel like losing everything. His eyes lifted to mine slowly. "But it actually feels like finally getting something right." And that was the moment it hit me fully. Not the confession. Not the first kiss. Not even the broken wedding. This. Rhett sitting beside me looking peaceful for the first time in months. Because after years of trying to become who everyone expected him to be, he'd finally chosen himself instead. And somehow, he'd chosen me too. 6 months later, Rhett and I drove back out to the lake. Same dock. Same midnight air. Same silver water stretching endlessly beneath the moonlight. Except this time, nothing felt unfinished. Rhett sat beside me with his shoulder pressed against mine, fingers loosely intertwined with mine between us like it was the most natural thing in the world now. Because it was. You know, he said thoughtfully, this place almost ruined my life. I laughed softly. Pretty sure that was your fault, actually. Fair. The wind moved gently across the water. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Rhett suddenly said, Hannah's dating somebody. I looked over immediately. Yeah. He nodded slowly. Apparently, he's an accountant. That sounds stable. Right? Good for her. There was genuine relief in his voice now. Time had softened some of the guilt. Not erased it completely, I don't think it ever would, but enough for him to breathe around it again. She deserved someone completely sure about her, he admitted quietly. I squeezed his hand once. Rhett looked over at me immediately after. What? Nothing. No, you did the face. What face? The emotional one. I laughed hard enough that he grinned. God, I loved him. Still. Constantly. Probably always. Rhett leaned closer until his forehead rested briefly against my shoulder. You know what's embarrassing? He murmured. What? I genuinely thought I was straight until like 5 minutes ago. I nearly choked laughing. I'm serious, he protested through his own laughter now. Looking back, the signs were insane. Like, oh, I don't know. He smirked slightly. Maybe the fact that I was emotionally obsessed with one man for almost a decade. That'll do it. Rhett smiled softly, then quieter. I really did try not to fall in love with you. The honesty in his voice still affected me every single time. You failed pretty hard, I admitted. Yeah. He looked at me fully then. Best mistake I ever made. And sitting there beside him under the same sky where everything first unraveled, I realized something important. For years, loving Rhett had felt lonely, like carrying around a future I'd never actually get to live. But now he looked at me the same way I'd looked at him all those years. Openly, completely, without fear anymore. And honestly, after everything it took for us to get here, that felt worth every painful second.